the keeper of Whispering Oaks Cemetery. It was a cold October evening when my car broke down in the middle of nowhere. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of dark orange and deep purple. I cursed under my breath, staring at the useless engine and the ominous woods surrounding the desolate road. A small sign caught my eye, barely visible in the dim light: Whispering Oaks Cemetery, 1 mile. The name sent a chill through me, though I couldn't explain why. My phone had no signal, and staying in the car seemed just as bad as walking. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the cemetery, hoping I'd find someone or at least shelter for the night. The air grew colder as I approached. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches like skeletal fingers scratching at the twilight sky. Finally, the cemetery gates came into view. Tall, wrought iron, and rusted, they creaked eerily as I pushed them open. Inside, the world felt different. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a faint mist clung to the ground like a shroud. Rows of ancient, weathered headstones stretched into the distance, some leaning at precarious angles, others crumbled into heaps of moss-covered rubble. I was about to turn back when a dim light flickered ahead. It came from a small stone building, a mausoleum by the look of it. The idea of entering didn't thrill me, but my options were limited. The door groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp and stale, carrying the faint scent of decay. The light came from an oil lamp resting on a stone ledge. To my surprise, an old man sat beside it, dressed in a tattered coat and wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face. "Evening," he said, his voice gravelly but calm. "I didn't mean to intrude," I stammered. "My car broke down. I was hoping to find someone who could help." He didn't answer immediately, just nodded toward a wooden chair opposite him. Hesitant but cold, I sat, his eyes glinting like chips of flint, locked onto mine. "This place ain't for wanderers," he finally said. His tone wasn't unkind, but there was a weight to his words that made my stomach twist. "I didn't mean to come here," I said quickly. "Just got lost." He chuckled, a low, raspy sound that echoed unnervingly in the small space. "Ain't nobody comes here by accident." That statement hung in the air like a bad smell. Before I could ask what he meant, he reached into his coat and pulled out a flask, taking a slow sip before speaking again. "Do you know why they call it Whispering Oaks?" I shook my head. My throat felt dry. "They say the trees here, they speak, but not to everyone, just to those they choose." His lips curled into a thin smile. "If you listen close, you'll hear 'em." I laughed nervously. "I think I'll pass on that." But the old man's face grew serious. "You're already hearing them, ain't you?" I froze. Because the moment he said it, I realized he was right. A faint murmuring sound, barely audible, seemed to drift through the air. At first I thought it was the wind, but no, it was rhythmic, almost like words just beyond the edge of comprehension. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the stone floor. "Thanks for the shelter, but I should really get back to my car." The man didn't move. He just stared at me with those unnervingly sharp eyes. "You think you can leave now?" he asked, almost pityingly. "They've noticed you." Something about his tone made my skin crawl. I turned and bolted out of the mausoleum, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I ran back through the cemetery. But no matter how far I ran, the gates never came into view. Panic surged. The murmuring had grown louder, clearer now. Whispers of my name. I spun around, shining my flashlight on the trees, the gravestones, the shadows that seemed to move just out of reach. And then I saw her, a woman pale as the moon, standing between two gravestones. Her eyes were hollow pits of darkness, her dress tattered and flowing like smoke. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her mouth hung open as if mid-scream. I staggered backward, tripping over a root. When I hit the ground, I heard them, voices, countless and overlapping, rising from the earth itself. "Stay," they whispered. "Stay with us." I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline overriding my terror. I ran blindly, my flashlight flickering as if mocking my attempts to find an escape. The whispers followed, relentless and insistent. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. The air grew still. I stopped, panting, and turned slowly. The old man stood a few feet away, illuminated by a light that didn't seem to come from my flashlight. His face was expressionless now, his eyes empty. "You should have listened," he said, his voice distant and hollow. Before I could respond, the ground beneath me shifted. I looked down and saw hands, pale, skeletal hands, reaching up from the earth. They grabbed my ankles, pulling me down. I screamed, thrashing, but it was useless. The whispers turned to laughter, a cacophony of cruel, mocking voices. The last thing I saw was the old man's face, watching me sink into the ground. He tipped his hat, turned, and walked back toward the mausoleum. I woke up in my car, the engine purring softly. The clock read 3:33 a.m. My heart was racing, my clothes damp with sweat. Or was it dirt? The cemetery gates loomed in my rearview mirror as I sped away, the whispers still echoing faintly in my ears. To this day, I don't know if it was real or some waking nightmare, but I never take shortcuts anymore, and I'll never forget the name Whispering Oaks. The keeper's warning. They always warned us about Blackwood Cemetery. As a kid growing up in a small town, ghost stories were our main entertainment, but Blackwood had something different. It wasn't just a local haunt. It was a shadow that hung over the town. The stories were vivid, people disappearing, whispers in the wind, and a lone figure, the keeper, who was said to stalk the grounds. I didn't believe in any of it, not until the night I went there. It started innocently enough. A dare. I had just moved back home after years in the city and found myself reconnecting with old friends. Over drinks, we started reminiscing, and Blackwood came up. Jake, always the loudmouth, bet I wouldn't last an hour there. He even sweetened the deal, $500 if I could record myself walking through the entire cemetery. Easy money, I thought. Armed with my phone and a flashlight, I arrived at Blackwood just after midnight. The iron gates were cold and rusted, the kind that groaned as you pushed them open. The first thing that hit me was the smell, a damp, earthy odor, like the place hadn't breathed fresh air in decades. I stepped in, and the gates clanged shut behind me. The cemetery was huge, much larger than I remembered. The moonlight barely pierced through the gnarled branches overhead, and the headstones were crooked, their inscriptions worn away by time. The deeper I walked, the quieter it got. No crickets, no wind, just the crunch of my boots on gravel and the occasional rustle of leaves. I started recording, narrating to keep myself calm. "So here I am, proving Jake wrong," I said, forcing a chuckle. "Blackwood Cemetery. Pretty creepy, huh?" Then I saw it. At first I thought it was just a shadow, but it was moving, slowly, deliberately, between the gravestones. A man, or something shaped like one. He wore a dark coat and had a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. "Hey!" I called out, more to reassure myself than anything. No response. I picked up my pace, skirting around the area where I'd seen him. The keeper, I thought, remembering the old stories. But those were just stories, weren't they? The flashlight began flickering. I smacked it, but the light only grew weaker until it died completely. The phone screen offered little help, and the darkness seemed to press in around me. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural whisper. At first I couldn't make out the words, but they grew louder, surrounding me from all sides. "Leave. You don't belong here." "Very funny, Jake," I shouted, spinning in circles. "I know it's you." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The whispers stopped as suddenly as they'd started, replaced by a soft crunching sound behind me. I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. There he was, the figure from before, closer now, standing perfectly still. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want?" He didn't answer. Instead, he raised an arm, pointing to something behind me, against every instinct screaming at me to run. I turned. There was a fresh grave, the soil still loose and damp. A headstone stood above it, gleaming unnaturally in the darkness. My blood turned to ice when I read the name. It was mine. I stumbled back, tripping over a root and landing hard on the ground. When I looked up, the figure was gone. The whispers started again, louder this time, almost frantic. "Dig," they urged. "See the truth." I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline drowning out my fear. This had to be a sick joke. My friends must have planned this. Jake, especially. I grabbed a nearby rock and began clawing at the dirt, desperate to prove it was just a prank. As I dug, the whispers grew into a deafening chorus, words overlapping, impossible to understand. My hands hit something solid, a wooden coffin. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't real." But I couldn't stop. I pried the lid open, the wood splintering under my frantic hands. Inside was a body, pale and still, dressed in the same clothes I was wearing. It was me. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out, hands trembling. It was a notification from my camera app. Video saved. 3:33 a.m. The screen flickered, and the recorded video played on its own. The footage showed me walking through the cemetery, but something was wrong. The voice narrating wasn't mine. It was deeper, colder. "Welcome to Blackwood Cemetery," it said. "Your new home." The camera panned down, showing my own feet. Except they weren't moving. The ground beneath me was. I was being dragged. The last frame showed the keeper, his hollow eyes staring directly into the lens. The phone died, and the whispers stopped. The grave was gone. The headstone vanished. It was as if nothing had happened. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back at my car, my lungs burning and legs shaking. The gates were open, though I swore I'd closed them behind me. When I got home, I found the video still on my phone, but the file was corrupted. No one believed me when I tried to explain. Jake even accused me of chickening out and editing the footage to avoid paying up. But I know what I saw, and every night since, I've dreamed of Blackwood Cemetery. In the dreams, I'm back at the grave, staring down at the headstone with my name on it. Only now the keeper is always there, watching, waiting. I think he's waiting for me to come back. A whisper in the graveyard. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts. I've always considered myself a rational man, someone who faces the world with logic. But what happened to me 3 years ago changed all that. It's a story I haven't told anyone. But tonight, as the wind howls outside and the shadows stretch long, I feel the need to confess. It began with a dare. My friends, Dan and Eric, had been obsessed with urban legends, and the latest one involved an abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of our town. It was called Blackwood Cemetery, and the stories about it were chilling. They said if you walked in at midnight and spoke to the stone angel at its center, you'd hear whispers, whispers of the dead. "Come on, man. What's the worst that could happen?" Dan teased, shoving a flashlight into my hand. The grin on his face told me he didn't expect me to accept the challenge. "Fine," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Let's do it." By 11:45 p.m., we were standing at the rusted gates of Blackwood Cemetery. The place reeked of decay and something else, something metallic, like blood. The air was unnaturally still, not even the chirp of a cricket to break the silence. My stomach churned as I pushed the gate open. The screech it made sounded like a dying scream. 10 minutes, Eric said, checking his watch. "Then we're out of here." I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows of crooked tombstones, their inscriptions worn away by time. The deeper we went, the colder it got. My breath fogged up in the air, even though it was the middle of summer, and then I saw it. The stone angel. It stood in the heart of the cemetery, its wings spread wide, its face tilted toward the heavens. But something about it was wrong. The eyes weren't serene like you'd expect. They were hollow, almost predatory. The lips, slightly parted, seemed to whisper secrets I couldn't hear. "Go on," Dan urged, his voice barely above a whisper. I approached the statue, my heart hammering in my chest. "Is this it?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Ask it," Eric said from behind me. I hesitated, feeling foolish. "Is anyone here?" I asked, my voice barely audible. At first nothing happened. The silence stretched so long, I almost laughed at how ridiculous the situation was. But then I heard it. A whisper, faint and indistinct, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. I spun around, expecting to see Dan or Eric playing a prank. But they were both frozen, their faces pale. "Did you hear that?" I asked. They nodded, their eyes wide with fear. "Let's get out of here," Dan muttered, already backing away. But I couldn't move. The whisper had grown louder, more insistent, though I still couldn't make out the words. It wasn't coming from the statue anymore. It was all around me, seeping into my ears like water. And then the ground beneath me shifted. At first I thought I'd stepped on loose soil, but when I looked down, my heart stopped. The earth around the angel's base was churning, as if something beneath it was trying to claw its way out. "Run!" Eric screamed, bolting toward the gate. I wanted to follow, but I was rooted to the spot, my eyes fixed on the angel. Its hollow eyes seemed to lock onto mine, and for a split second, I thought I saw its lips move. "Stay." The words slammed into my mind, not as a whisper, but as a command. My legs gave out, and I fell to my knees. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and chaotic, filling my head with voices I didn't recognize. They spoke of pain, betrayal, and death. And then I saw them. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, pale and translucent. They weren't solid, but they were unmistakably human. Men, women, and children, all with faces twisted in agony. They surrounded me, their mouths moving in unison, though I couldn't understand the words. "Help us," one of them finally said, a woman with hollow eyes and a gaping wound where her throat should have been. "Set us free." "How?" I croaked, my voice barely audible. But before she could answer, the angel moved. Its stone wings cracked and shifted, and its head turned to face me fully. Its mouth opened wider, revealing teeth, jagged, sharp, and too many to belong to anything human. "Leave!" it roared, its voice a thunderclap that sent the figures scattering like smoke. I scrambled to my feet, my survival instincts finally kicking in. Without looking back, I ran, the whispers chasing me all the way to the gate. When I burst out onto the road, Dan and Eric were waiting, their faces pale and stricken. "What the hell was that?" Dan demanded, but I couldn't answer. I didn't have the words. We never spoke of that night again. But I can't forget it. The whispers still haunt me, especially when I'm alone. Sometimes I hear them in the dead of night, faint and distant, calling my name. And sometimes I dream of the angel, but in my dreams it doesn't stay still. It watches me, its hollow eyes burning into my soul, waiting for the day I'll return.